So we're now looking at how to exegete Proverbs. So first off, what is a proverb? Well, a proverb is a general truth. A general truth. So for example, if I say there's never any buses and then 4 come at once, you could say that in Roehampton here, that is a general truth. You wait ages for a bus and then suddenly 4 of them all turn up, one after the other. Now, is that always the case? It's not. Maybe it seems like it, but in reality, it's not always the case, but it seems to be a general truth. And this is the important thing about Proverbs. They are general truths. So, for example, Proverbs 22 verse 6, in the ESV says, "Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it." Now, this is a general truth, right? But not always the case, 100% of the time, does this ring true, right? So some parents have raised their child up in the way they should go, and when their child is older, they have departed from that way, okay? And some people then have battered them with this proverb and said, well, you see, you didn't raise them up the right way. That's why it's happened. But that is to misuse the Proverbs. Proverbs are general truths that say, in general, this is how it works. So in general, if you raise your child up in the way they should go, they won't depart from it when they're older, in general. But there are exceptions to the rule. Now here's the thing. Proverbs they would lose their punch. I think the proper word is pithy. Well, pithy, yeah, pithiness. It would lose its pithiness, its punch, if you said the proverb and then said, in general, this is true, but there are exceptions. Yeah, so if I'm at the bus stop, right down here, and I'm like, there's never a bus, and then 4 of them come at once, in general, but there are plenty of exceptions to what I just said. It just loses its whole thing, yeah? It just totally go yes. Exactly. A bit like, I think Michael McIntyre does the joke about the all you need is love, and then the guy at the end of that line saying, well, actually, you also need shelter and food and clothing, you know. It's like, kind of ruins the song, okay? So with these proverbs, we're saying this is not the case 100% of the time, but that doesn't mean the Bible's not true. It just means that's the genre of Proverbs. Proverbs are never meant to be taken as 100% of the time. This is always what happens. Any questions on that? Okay.
If someone did come up to you and say that, though, would it be wise to think about it? So say if you did have children and one of them grew up not to be a Christian and someone said that to you, would it still be wise maybe to think, did I train them up in the way they should go?
Yes. So you can abuse Proverbs 2 ways. One is to say this is the case in every situation. So you say, therefore, your children are bad now, you didn't train them the right way. The other way of abusing them is saying, oh, well, it's just a general truth. It don't apply to me. And so we've got to be careful with those 2 different extremes.
Some people might, because thinking about that proverb, as far as I understood it, I thought that was, I took it literally. So, although people's children might not necessarily initially go the way that you'd hope that they would go based on the fact that you train them up, the idea is that they will, at some point, come back. Are you saying that they're not?
Yeah, I'm saying that the genre of Proverbs doesn't work that way. So you can't take a proverb and say, because it says this, therefore in 100% of cases, this is always the outcome. Yeah? And this is one of the problems when you read the book of Job, one of the problems with, is it the first 3 guys? I'm not thinking of Elihu at the end, but the other guys. That when they give Job advice, they're basically giving him proverbs. They're giving him what's called wisdom literature. So the Proverbs is one genre, and it comes in the genre of wisdom literature, wise sayings that tell you how to be wise. And the stuff that they say to him is true. They say the wicked perish, God judges the wicked, all this kind of stuff they say is true, right? But what they're doing is they're taking it and they're applying it as if 100% of the time this is true. When people do bad things, God punishes them. Joe, bad things are happening to you, which must mean that God is punishing you for some bad things you've done. You're evil. And what they're doing is they're misusing wisdom literature. And if you like, you could say they're misusing Proverbs. So we got to be careful about not doing this with one another, and especially when we're exegeting Proverbs, careful of not doing it. We've got to be aware of the genre. We've got to be, it's like when, have you ever had, you buy something and it doesn't work? And you're trying it out. Sometimes it works, and then you turn it off and on, and then it don't work. So you go to the shop. Yeah, you go to the shop, and you say to them, it doesn't work. And they go, let's have a look. They plug it in, turns on, it works. And you turn around and you say, it's always the way, isn't it? Yeah, or you go to, your doctor has referred you to a specialist. Finally, after this long waiting list, you get to see the specialist. And they're like, okay, let's see you move your arm. How far can you move it? You're like, what? I can move it really far today. They're like, does this hurt? No, but normally, every day it hurts when you do that. But today, it's always the way. And sometimes even the specialist will say to you, it's always the way, isn't it? Now, they're talking the same kind of language as Proverbs. They're not actually saying it is always the way, 100% of the time, because if they did, then they'd be like, there's no point in me having this job, because I just always say to people, that's always the way. It probably normally does hurt, doesn't it? Let's just give you a surgery straight away. Don't even need to look at you. It's always the way that when you're examined, you don't feel any pain. But instead, they're using that kind of genre of saying it's always the way, meaning, doesn't this happen an awful lot to people? Yes. It's not always the way, but it would be a really boring saying, a really boring proverb if we said, this happens very often, doesn't it? It's like it loses its piffiness.
Sorry to come back to this, but that could make people feel quite uncertain. And the reason why I said that is because if the proverb said that, as far as I understood, that's what it meant. So if I see like somebody who has tried to raise their children in a godly way and the child is not going a godly way, I trust that they are going to go a godly way at some point, because that's what the proverb said.
That's not what the proverb says. That's the way people misread the proverb. So that would be like, let's say I say to you, you're one of my children, and we're waiting for the bus, and they're like, Dad, why is there no bus? And then later, 4 buses suddenly all turn up at once. And I say, son, there's never any buses, and then they all come at once. Now, if my child says, my dad has told me there's never any buses, and then they all come at once, I will now live by that. And then they raise their children, and one day, their kids are like, Dad, where's the bus? And they say, my dad promised me there will never be any buses. But then they will all come at once. Have faith. They will all come at once. Plenty of buses for everyone. Well, what would have happened there is they've totally misread the proverb that I gave them. And they're now, they're not using the proverb that I gave them in the way that I intended it to be used. Does that make sense?
Is part of the issue that it's God saying it, because it's God's word and it's inspired. So does that affect the way that we view it? So like what Harriet's saying, ultimately if God said, train up a child and it will, not depart, then you're like, well, God knows what he's talking about and he doesn't lie, kind of thing. You know what I mean?
So the key thing, I think, is to realize that although God's breathed out these words, God's breathed them out in a certain style that to the people of the day would be understood as this is a general truth that most of the time is what occurs, but there are exceptions. Now, this is why at the beginning of the course I got you to read those different things from different genres, because the way you read them is genre dependent. So, for example, when you read the SAS Survival Guide that talked about how to build a tent and put up a tent, you didn't read it as, I must immediately now build a tent. You read it as, this is a manual that is telling me, if I want to build a tent, put the wood up here and move this along. Same way, when you read the account from the book Street Boys, where it says someone said to someone, go and get Jar Jar, or whatever it was, you didn't read that as, this is what I must go and do now. Instead, you read it as, this is the genre of story, of narrative. It's not telling me to now go and get Jar Jar from the police. It's actually telling me what happened in the story. So the genre is really important. I think this will get more clear when we look at the next proverb. Proverbs 26, verses 4 to 5 in the ESV. You've got two proverbs here. First one says, answer not a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him yourself. Then the next one says, answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. Now, God's breathed these words out, and God is telling us, and it's through the person who's writing, it's through the Proverbs are written by the teacher at the beginning. It's from the teacher writing to their son, right? So it's from the teacher, but obviously it's God breathing out these words as well. And first off, it's saying, do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him. But then it's saying, do answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in your own eyes. So this example right here shows us that the Proverbs are not saying this proverb is true 100% of the time in every occasion. But instead, these Proverbs are saying these are general truths. Otherwise, what we've got here is God contradicting himself. And we know that God cannot contradict himself because the Bible tells us that God cannot lie. So let's just look at this proverb here. The first one says, answer not a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him yourself. So in general, if you answer a fool according to their folly, in general, not every time, but in general, you will look like them. Okay, so for example, a fool says, I'm not going to help you because you were rude to me. And then you reply to them, well, I'm not going to help you either because you were rude to me. Okay, now you've just joined the fool, right? They were foolish and now you're being foolish. You've gone down to their level. In this situation, the Proverbs are saying, don't answer a fool according to their folly or you'll be a fool yourself. Okay? But then look at the next proverb that says, answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. This could be a situation where a fool says, I don't believe in God because I can't see him. And you turn around and say, I don't believe in air because I can't see it. What you've done, you've just answered the fool according to his folly. You've deliberately acted like a fool to show the fool how foolish they are, right? But here's the thing, God's letting us know. With some fools, this works well. With other fools, it doesn't work well. Sometimes when you do this, you actually become a fool yourself. So right here, we've got an example of how these proverbs, we've got to be careful how we treat them and realize they are the genre of proverb. Don't take them as absolute 100% of the time. So, for example, there's a saying, a bird in the hand is better than two in the bush, right? That's a proverb. We use that but not all the time. Sometimes it's better to have two in the bush. Blatant. That's why people have pension schemes. Yeah? In certain circumstances, it is better to not have that £5 a month, but to put that into a pension scheme so that when you're older and can't work anymore, that you've got thousands. In that situation, what's better to have, a bird in the hand or two in the bush? Two in the bush. But there's other situations where you need that £5 a month or you can't provide for your family. So in which case, is it better to put money away into a pension to get money later or better to have that £5 a month now? £5 a month now, which is what? The bird in the hand or the two in the bush? Bird in the hand. So you see the genre of Proverbs. When we say to people, better to have a bird in the hand than two in the bush, we don't mean in every single situation it's better to have a bird in the hand than two in the bush. We're just saying, I think in this context we're talking about right now, today, the thing you're saying, mate, you're right. Don't spend money on a pension. It's better to have a bird in the hand than two in the bush. That same bloke, a few months later, his circumstances might be different. Yeah? And in his situation, you might have another saying. I'm trying to think of a proverb now, but there might be another saying that's like, it's better to have a heap of money later than some money now. You know? And these are just the way Proverbs work.
With regards to that proverb, I didn't think you owned the bush. That's why it's better to have the bird in the hand.
Yeah.
You explained it in a way that I never understood it before.
Yeah, because the point of the bush is that they could fly away and you haven't got them.
Yeah.
And that's the same with pensions as well. So a pension, you don't have a guarantee that, depending on the type, I don't know a lot about pensions, but you don't have a guarantee. And we know loads of people in this country ended up having all their pensions stolen by Maxwell. So, but I don't claim to be an expert on that proverb. It's always kind of thrown me when people say it, thinking of bushes and birds.
So, Brad, would it be fair to say two things? One, that a proverb is a conditional truth. It's a truth that's based on conditions. If the conditions are met, it's true. But there may be occasions when the conditions are not met, then it's not true. You can think about it. And then the second thing is this, that God uses a particular style of writing with the intent that we would understand his meaning based on him honouring that style of writing. So he uses the genre of Proverbs because he wants his meaning to be understood in that, from that point of view, from the point of view of a proverb. You get what I'm saying? So when God uses a particular style, it's not just the writer thinking, okay, I'm going to write poetry, I'm going to write proverb, but it's God inspiring the person to use that style because he wants the meaning to be understood from that point of view.
Yeah, because Proverbs play a purpose in that. Because they're pithy, they're easy to remember, and they've got a lot of imagery about them as well, like, you know, the snout in the ring in pig's nose, you got, you know, kind of thing. So it sticks and it works. But it's very important to get that whenever God communicates, he communicates in particular genres, and different genres have different rules. So, for example, the other day I was reading, because I was looking at your work that you sent me for your exegesis. You've done about Aaron building the golden calf, yeah? And then God gives the command to go and kill their, what is it?
Just to run through the Israelites killing them.
Run through the Israelites killing them. Now, what genre is this in? Narrative. So when I read it, I do not go, oh, God is telling me right now, run through the camp, killing people. No, the rules of the genre tell me this is a story and this is reported speech right now, giving a command right there. Same way, when I read in, when Abraham is told, go, leave your father's land and travel to the land I'll show you. When I read that, I don't say, I must get up and go and leave my father's land and go to the land that God will show me. The reason why I don't is because the rules of the genre tell me this is reported speech, what God was telling that person then. Every time we read a part of the Bible, there's certain genres that have rules. So when we do the Psalms, we've already done the Psalms, you make my feet like hinds' feet. When we read that, we don't think, wow, David had some weird transformation happen where his legs turned into hinds' feet and he looked like Mr. Tumnus from Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. We don't do it. Instead, we say the rules of the genre, poetry, tell us this is metaphorical. And this is telling us how fleet-footed David could be. But here's the thing. When it comes to poetry, a lot of us intuitively know that genre has those rules. When it comes to narrative, most of us intuitively know I'm not supposed to go through the camp killing people. I'm not supposed to go to a land that God will show me. That, you know, we get that. When it comes to Proverbs, often in the church, this is something that we don't get so much, which is funny because we all use Proverbs all the time. You know, well, I don't know how much but we do use Proverbs. When it comes to Bible Proverbs, for some reason, we often forget that there are certain rules to how you read Proverbs. So just want to give an example. Can someone give a British proverb?
You light up a fag, the bus comes quicker?
Okay. Okay.
If you wait for a bus and it was cold, it would be like light up a fag and the bus will come.
Okay. Light up a fag and the bus will come. Now, when people say that, do people believe that 100% of the time if you light up a cigarette, the bus will come? No. But people are thinking, this is my general experience in life. You light up a cigarette and then the bus will come. Yeah. Okay, another proverb, maybe a better known one.
Don't cry over spilt milk.
Don't cry over Spilt milk. Okay, so let's say, right, we say don't cry over spilt milk, yeah? You spill some milk, oh, don't cry over spilt milk, yeah? Now let's say that your family is starving. You're on the verge, all of you, of dying of starvation. And you've managed to get some milk, yeah? And you have this tiny bit of milk in a milk bottle. And you're like, I'm going to pass this around my family. You know, this will keep us going for another day. And then you drop the bottle and it smashes and the milk goes everywhere. And all of you start crying. Would any of you in that situation say, don't cry over spilt milk? No. That proverb there, that proverb is not saying in 100% of instances, do not cry over spilt milk. But it's saying in general, don't cry over spilt milk. But there may well be some instances where spilt milk is the matter of life or death.
Especially if you spilled it on your iPad or something.
If you spilled it, you could spill milk on your iPad and then you break it and maybe you're going to cry about that. And people, only if they were being annoying, would say, don't cry over spilt milk, right? So, yeah, you could be doing a really important scientific research for cancer and you suddenly come up with a cure for cancer and then someone spills a glass of milk, it goes all over it and you're like, you know, and you're like, or you got the antidote for some poison that someone's got and you're like, I've made up the antidote, it's the last ingredients left. And then someone spills their milk in it and you cry and you're like, right, the human race is over now, this outbreak is going to go and all that. That's worth crying over. Right, so it's probably getting a bit ridiculous now, but
You say that like guidelines, whereas you get guidelines, say if you buy something, if you do buy a computer, and it's kind of warnings, if you do this may result, if you do that may result, you might break it. It's not guaranteeing it will break it, but if you don't follow it, the risk's all yours. Like smoking kills. My nana died at 86 of an unrelated illness to smoking. She smoked 40 a day. Whereas the advice, it'd be wise not to smoke, but there's a chance that you will die.
Yeah, and I think you're right, and I think with the Proverbs, there's a high probability of it. So, for example, Proverbs 15:1. I just looked up a proverb for random. Yeah, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Now, have you ever been in a situation, right, where someone's been angry and you've tried giving them a gentle answer and they've got even more angry? I've had that plenty of times, you know. So what now? But God ain't a liar. But God's speaking to me in the language of Proverbs, and He's saying, "Listen. In general, there's some exceptions, but in general, if someone's angry with you and you're calm, then you will turn away their wrath. In general, but the genre almost says in brackets, but there are some exceptions to this."
And would you say it's not that we're just doing that to turn away the wrath, or for our kids, because I want to bring my kids up well anyway, and if they turn away, then at least I know I've done my job and it's on their own head if they've turned away from God. And again, if you respond gently to somebody who's angry, your conscience is clear. If they still kick off and want to fight you, you know you've done your best to... It's still good advice to behave in that way, even though the outcome isn't as bad, isn't it?
I didn't follow that, but because a lot of people go, then must be good.
Sorry, not the outcome of your advice to do things. So even if the outcome isn't how the proverb says, it's still wise to do what's requested, isn't it?
Exactly. So, for example, do I say, hey, Shay, you know that proverb about raise a child in the way they should go? Like, that's just a general truth. So let's not bother. No, of course I don't. I'm like, that's a general truth. Let's do it. But then when I have friends who have done family devotions with their kids, taught them the scriptures from a young age, been wonderful, loving parents, and then their kids go off the rails, I don't say to them, you obviously didn't raise them right. Instead, I say to them, look, I saw the way you raised them, man. You worked real hard to train them up in the right way, you know. But sadly, there's exceptions to that rule sometimes. And they've made their own choice, but let's keep praying for them that they will come back. But I don't give them a false promise and say they will come back. I think false promises are very, very dangerous to tell them they will come back, because if their children don't come back, And if the parents outlive the children, then the parents will be like, God promised me, because I raised them the right way, that they would, and he hasn't delivered. Whereas God would say, no, you misread the genre of the proverb. That's not how it's meant to be.
And that can be very painful, isn't it? If someone comes up to you and goes, look, you didn't raise your kids properly. They've gone off into the world. And you're like, yes, I did. And you could destroy someone saying that.
Mm-hmm. So as you read the Proverbs, you'll notice this. You'll notice this a lot. So another random one, Proverbs 15:12. Mockers resent correction, so they avoid the wise. That's true, but every now and then a mocker comes to you and says, give me advice. So it's a general truth. It's not saying 100% of the time. If that was the case, then loads of people who are Christians now never would have become Christians, because they would have always avoided Christians. And verse 15:22, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. Has there ever been a time where, so the general truth is, if you don't get advice from people, your plans will fail. But have you ever had a time where you haven't asked anyone advice and you've done something and it went really well? So that's an exception to the rule, once or twice.
Sometimes you can ask many people advice and they give you advice and it goes wrong.
Exactly, you could, yeah. Yeah, so it says here, but with many advisors they succeed. Well, there's a Bible story that tells us the opposite if we misunderstand the genre of Proverbs. So King Rehoboam, right? Solomon's son, he gets his young advisors around him. He grew up. They give him bad advice. The kingdom splits. So God doesn't contradict himself. If someone said, aha, this, like I can imagine Richard Dawkins saying, this is a contradiction. And we just say, no, the genre is Proverbs. There are exceptions to it. They're general truths. Okay. Let's go to how to exegete the Proverbs. So one of the things you want to do with Proverbs is ask, does it belong to a group of similar proverbs? Sometimes you've got a proverb isolated on its own, and then it just moves on to another proverb that seems to have nothing to do with the first one. But sometimes you'll find some of the proverbs are grouped together, and identifying that group helps you understand the individual proverbs. So let's have a look at Proverbs 16, verses 1 to 4. And if we can read out one verse each, starting with Ephraim, or maybe starting with Giles. I see that biscuit there.
Proverbs 16 verse 1. To humans belong the plans of the heart, but from the Lord comes the proper answer of the tongue.
All a man's ways seem innocent to him, but motives are weighed by the Lord.
Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and he will establish your plans.
The Lord has made everything for its purpose, even the wicked for the day of trouble.
Okay. So right there, what kind of grouping does that all fall into?
Plans.
Yeah, plans. Yeah, exactly, plans. So right there, that's helpful to just identify, okay, all of these together seem to be something to do with plans, and that sometimes can help us understand what an individual proverb is about in its context. You might have also noticed as you read that the proverbial nature of the proverb. So it says in verse 2, all a person's ways seem pure to them. Well, I can say to that a yes and a no. In that's definitely a general experience of my life, that I think I'm in the right and that I'm doing the right thing. But there's exceptions, because there's also times where I think like I'm doing the wrong thing. And I'm like, this is bad, man. I need to repent of this. I'm having a bad attitude right now. So in that case, with this proverb, I don't say, oh, God got it wrong. I just say that's the genre of the proverb. In general, we do think our ways are pure to us. Same way, verse 3, commit to the Lord whatever you do, and he will establish your plans. Well, there's been plenty of missionaries that have gone off on the mission field and said, Lord, we commit our way to you. And a few months later, they've got no funds and they've had to leave and come back home. They could say, well, God said he'd establish our plans. And we'd have to gently say, yeah, but the genre here just means in general. There are exceptions to the rule. But then we'd show them the next verse, verse 4, the Lord works out everything to its proper end. So we'd say, okay, you had to leave the mission field, there wasn't funds, but God has a purpose in it. There's a proper end to this that God has written. Now, and in this situation, this would be a case, God works out everything to its proper end. Are there any exceptions to that? No. So in that situation, we'd say there are no exceptions to that. So you see, you got to be careful with this. You got to say there are exceptions to Proverbs, but you can have a proverb that doesn't have any exceptions.
Is it like the proverb?
So, for example, verse 5, the Lord detests all the proud of heart. Well, you're like, yeah, that is the case. But then again, when it says, be sure of this, they will not go unpunished, are there exceptions to that?
No.
Anyone here ever been proud of heart? Anyone here confident they're not going to get punished? Yeah, so I'd say that's an exception to the rule there.
Could you say that Jesus got punished for us, though? That's why, so someone has been punished.
But Jesus is not proud of heart. So it says they will not go unpunished. So again, it's a general truth.
I understand that.
Okay, so we look for groupings. Now in the exercises, this is going to be important because I've deliberately put a proverb there that without looking at the grouping, you might not apply it in its actual context of what it's talking about. Okay, the second point of exegeting the Proverbs is, what's the principle here? So bear in mind, this is a general truth, and I've said don't be one of Job's comforters. Don't be someone who takes the Proverbs and applies them as if there are never any exceptions. So you find a proverb and you say, what's the general principle? So for example, Proverbs 16, verse 2, all a person's ways seem pure to them, but motives are weighed by the Lord. Or, yeah, what's the general principle there?
We can sometimes do things for wrong motives.
We can do things for wrong motives. Yeah. And who knows what our motives really are? The Lord knows, yeah. So we might have wrong motives and not even know about it, but God knows what the right motives are. So I suppose part of the principle there is, part of it is maybe not trusting ourselves, not trusting our own evaluation of our motives.
And then that's where you get a load of people, wise counsel will come in.
Yeah, wise counsel. Of course, interesting as well because the Apostle Paul at one point talks about his motives being good. So we want to avoid reductionism, cross-references, systematic theology, and so on. You know, and someone with a new heart, are they able sometimes to tell if their motives are good or bad? Okay, so you establish the principle, and this can take quite a bit of wrestling. I've heard of people who, because there's 31 proverbs, they do one a day at the dining table with their family, so that they actually wrestle with it with their families and say, what do you think this proverb means? And they spend a bit of time wrestling with it, trying to work out what it means, which is an interesting idea. Okay, point 3, how does this point to Christ? So you work out the principle of the proverb, but then you say, how does it point to Jesus? So remember, all scripture points to Christ. Also, bear this in mind, Hebrew proverbs differ from other ancient proverbs. Some people like to talk about how similar the proverbs are to Egyptian proverbs. But here's the thing, the Hebrew proverbs are written in the context of a covenant relationship with Yahweh. All these proverbs you're reading are assuming the covenant context of Yahweh. Okay, and so you'll see plenty of stuff throughout the Proverbs to indicate that, and that especially in the beginning of Proverbs. Okay, so we're not just saying what are some wise sayings that help out our non-Christian friends. We're looking at all these wise sayings in light of Jesus Christ and the new covenant that he's brought us into. So, for example, Proverbs 1:7 says, fearing the Lord is the beginning of moral knowledge. Some of you might know that translated, instead of moral knowledge, as what? Wisdom. So, Net Bible there are saying that wisdom here means moral knowledge. Yeah, so in terms of knowledge, you can have academic, intellectual knowledge, but your moral knowledge is low. You get some people like that, they're really clever, but when it comes to living their life in a wise way, in a moral way. It just seems stupid. Wisdom is like moral knowledge, knowing how to live your life well. And fearing the Lord is the beginning of it. So we don't want to isolate the Proverbs from our Lord Jesus Christ, if fearing our Lord Jesus Christ is the beginning of these Proverbs. And for us, fearing God as members of the New Covenant doesn't mean being afraid of God that he'll wipe us out, but it means being like, wow, God should wipe me out. He's powerful enough to wipe me out. He does wipe out the wicked. And yet because of Jesus Christ and his grace and mercy, he's not going to wipe me out. And that should give us a reverence for God, like a sort of fear, but not a scared fear, but like a rah. I just missed that. Like I remember once I was in a road in Albania where a truck suddenly comes speeding, one of those mountain roads, you know, and suddenly it just comes speeding around, and me and this other missionary just went, ah! And we actually let out an expletive deletive as we did, which was really embarrassing. Like we didn't know that we still rolled like that, but the same word come out of both of us. And then we landed, you know, on the ground, lying down, and it's kind of like, you know, like, one, can't believe we just missed that. Two, can't believe we just said that. But, you know, but here's the thing, that our fear for God, in a sense, should be like, I can't believe I missed that judgment. Can't believe I missed hell. So close. Only because of Jesus Christ. And so there should be a sense of fear in that sense.
When it comes to preaching the Proverbs, would it be good at the start of the service, however you do your co-text when you say picture the scene, to remind people that these are wise sayings that are good principles to live by, that are general truths? Saying that of how it applies. So instead of going through every proverb, so say if you did a theme on friendship, which I preached on, instead of saying everyone this is a general thing, at the start you say that these are general wise sayings which are general truths.
I'd leave that up to you.
Okay.
Okay, right, so that's Proverbs. I'm going to get you to exegete a proverb now, but before I do, any questions about Proverbs?
Some of the personification that it uses and the similes and that. Do you have anything to say about that?
Anything to say about personification? I would say basically the same principles that you've learned in Old Testament narrative is kind of similar, which is the whole thing of sometimes things get personified, like wisdom gets personified as a person. I don't actually think wisdom in Proverbs is Jesus, but maybe that's just because I'm reacting to JW's knocking on my door and saying wisdom was created, therefore Jesus was created. And so I always say to them, I don't think Proverbs 8 is talking about Jesus. I think it's talking about wisdom.
Going back to what Shane said, if you were going to teach through Proverbs, would you do it verse by verse? Okay, today, chapter 1, verse 1, and we're going to go to chapter 5, verse 5 and pick up verse 6 next week, or would you teach it in sections? So like plans, would you have like 1 week where you talk about planning and making plans and then teach chapter 16, was it verse 1 to 4? How would you do it thematically? Or would you do it verse by verse?
So I would basically leave it up to you to work out how you would teach the Proverbs. What I would say is that the Proverbs look to me like this was written by someone to teach their son how to be wise. And I would say that this is very good living room material, very good bedroom material, very good in the home, how do we learn how to be wise? And I think it lends itself to that very well. In terms of preaching on a Sunday morning to the congregation, I would probably be more inclined to pick individual proverbs that teach on the same theme, or I would say FCF, if you know what an FCF is yet. If you don't yet, you will know soon on this course. And I would group them together like that and teach on that. I don't know how to preach through a whole, say, chapter 15. I don't know how to preach through a whole chapter of Proverbs like that. That's probably just my own personal limitations. There's other bits where I could do, there's large sections you could easily do, like chapter 1. There's a whole amazing bit there you could do as one go. I might teach a series going through 1 to 4, those chapters, but when it comes to the individual Proverbs, I'm not too sure. Okay, so with the person next to you, I'd like you please to exegete Proverbs 6:28. Proverbs 6:28, using those 3 steps. Okay, so having just exegeted Proverbs 6:28, first I'll read out the proverb. Can a man walk on hot coals without his feet being scorched? Well, right there you've got an example of the proverbial nature. Because we do know of people who walk on hot coals without their feet being scorched, right? It's actually a common magician's trick to walk on hot coals and not get your feet burned. So again, this is a general truth. So in this room, if we all tried to walk across hot coals, would our feet get burned? Yeah. But if we went around the whole of London, we'd probably find there's a few guys who know the technique of how you can walk across it without burning your feet. But it doesn't mean that we say the proverb don't work. It means that we say that is the nature of the proverb. So, have I got the right proverb? Because I saw some puzzled faces.
Yeah, you're not the one who had the wrong proverb.
Okay, right. There must be a proverb in that somewhere. In fact, actually, I heard Robert say a proverb whilst you were doing that one, which is a great example. Good things come to those who wait. That's not always true, but in general, that can be true in general, but I don't think it's a biblical proverb anyway, is it? It's just like British proverb, so we don't care about if it's true or not anyway. But it's not intended to mean in every single time. A bit like that annoying one where people go, time heals all wounds. Well, for a lot of people, the experience is no, it still hurts. Okay. So, with this proverb, did it belong to a group of similar proverbs?
Yes.
Yeah, what ones did it belong to? Give me a verse range.
20 to 29.
20 to 29. Someone got 20 to 35. What chapter is this again? 6. My Bible has just gone to Romans for some reason.
I've got 24 to 29. Maybe
Okay, but in general, so people have come up with different groupings. That's okay, but in general, you've seen this proverb doesn't stand on its own. It's linked in with other stuff. And how did that help you define the principle here? What's the grouping about? Adultery. Okay, so when it says, can a man walk on hot coals without his feet being scorched? What's it talking about?
Consequences. Messing with a woman that's not yours.
Yeah, the consequences of messing with a woman who's not yours. So it's saying, is it possible to walk on hot coals without consequences of burned feet? And it's saying, no, in general, there might be exceptions, but in general, it's not possible. Same way, can you really get away with adultery without consequences? No. In general, you can't. Now, there might be exceptions. Someone might say, I heard about some guy. No one ever found out about it. Except me, because I know the story. And we say they didn't find out until he died or something, You'd be like, okay, that's an exception to the rule. But in general, you best believe, don't be messing around with another woman's wife. Well, that's very modern, isn't it? Another man's wife, because I've lost it now, but I think you know what I was trying to say. Okay, so that helps us to see this isn't just a general principle of, hey, don't do silly stuff because there's consequences. In the context, it's actually talking about adultery and the consequences. Okay, now, what about with regards to how does it point to Christ? What did you come up with?
we come up with is that Jesus took our punishment for committing adultery on God.
So Jesus took our punishment for committing adultery against God. Okay, so that could be a way it points to Christ. Anything else?
You'll burn if you don't turn.
Say it a bit louder.
Sorry, you will burn in hell if you don't turn to Christ. I use that.
Okay, I see. So if you have committed adultery, You will burn if you don't turn to Christ. And how I see what you're saying. Okay, let's have some more.
Christ honoured the will of the Father, the counsel of the Father, and didn't commit sexual sin.
Great. So Jesus didn't commit sexual sin. So I think that's a great way it points to Christ. We see Jesus lived out this proverb perfectly. And even though there would have been opportunities for him, he never went down that road. Other ways it points to Christ.
Could we say God is sorry.
So I don't know if this is right, but I thought Christ would judge people according to the condition of their hearts, because he talks about adultery one time. He says you can't only commit adultery in the actions, you can also commit in your hearts.
Okay, so one way you could say it points to Christ in that is that Jesus makes it clear in the Sermon on the Mount that we can commit adultery of our hearts. So yeah, that could be a possible way.
I'm not sure, it might be a bit tenuous, but Scripture talks about God being jealous for his bride, or being jealous for Israel. Maybe, no, tenuous. Okay.
I didn't even say anything. I don't know. Adultery. I mean, certainly, I think with adultery, there is something about how adultery, the metaphor of adultery, if that is a metaphor, is used as a metaphor for how the Israelites treat God. And so you could then say there's a sense in which it would point to Christ in that, yeah, I'm sure there are ways. Here's the thing with how stuff points to Christ. I don't want to hem that in and be like, oh no, there's certain rules for the only ways you can say it points to Christ. Because everything in some way points to Christ. Like if you're the kind of person that can look at a dandelion and be like, wow, that really makes me think of Jesus, because, in him all things hold together, and the only reason why these little things are staying on the dandelion when they can be so easily knocked off is because Jesus has said, I'm going to hold them together right now. Then I'm like, boom, that's great. If someone says, well, this points me to Christ because Christ lived it in my place, that's great. If someone says it points me to Christ because only through Jesus can I get forgiveness for this sin that I've committed, that's great. Like, there's so many different ways we can think about how things point to Christ.
I was going to say, because in here the story says seductress. So when Jesus was in the garden, Satan tried to seduce him with the food. So something that looks good, that tastes good. Now you might think, just eat. If you're hungry, eat a piece of bread. What can the harm be? At the time, it doesn't seem like there's any. So it points to Christ, that Christ did that, or this Christ hearkened to the Father, listened to the voice of the Father, and resisted temptation.
Okay, great. Okay, so basically for your homework, you will do the other Proverbs, yeah, in your groups, yeah. But what we're going to do here now is we are going to end Proverbs. So well done, everyone.